Hello, I'm Dr. Rick Chambers, and welcome to this edition of Health, Happiness, and Harmony Partner training videos. And a Health, Happiness, and Harmony Partner is anyone working on their own individual journey at the same time as they're trying to help others in their individual journeys toward health, happiness, and harmony. Today we're going to look at the spiritual practices or spiritual journey within the individual journey. And I'll assume that there's a subjective dimension and inner dimension in which health, happiness, and harmony act as motivators of behavior. I would also assume there's an outward aspect to this or dimension in which health, happiness, and harmony can act as navigational beacons. They call or they can be thought of as goals in the individual and in spiritual journey. How do 3HPs integrate the diverse faith traditions and spiritual practices found now in local communities? We use a curriculum I call the Narrative of Wholeness, and this is part of that curriculum. And it attempts to balance or hold in tension the values associated with inclusiveness and belonging with the values associated with individual integrity. And when you hold those two together, you're trying to optimize both. I don't think you can exclude the diverse spiritual practices and different faith traditions from the individual journey toward wholeness. But at the same time, I don't think that spiritual practice should be required, that a specific spiritual practice or faith tradition should be required in the individual journey. 3HPs need to understand and work within the specific local communities where they live. This means each location will have a varying mix of the following, and I will use my local area as an example. Where I live, it might be assumed that some percentage between 20 to 80% would want to frame their entire individual journey within the Christian faith tradition. This means somewhere between 20 and 80% of people would not want to frame their entire journey. They could be using other spiritual practices from outside the Christian tradition. They could also be from another faith tradition, or they would prefer no spiritual practices or alignment with the faith tradition. A certain percent of people will frame their individual journey in specific practices within a specific faith tradition. Another percent of people will frame their individual journey and their spiritual practices along the emerging spiritual, not religious path, or not necessarily religious path. There's another percent that will frame their journey outside any spiritual practices or faith traditions, but they're also considered full members of the local community and is also being on a legitimate individual path. Much of the curriculum of the Narrative of Wholeness would come from various faith traditions. And when this curriculum is taught, it will be taught by a 3HP that shares or participates in the particular tradition that they're teaching about. Questions about a particular tradition will be directed to 3HPs that practice that tradition. Many 3HPs will only work from the viewpoint of their faith tradition. Some 3HPs can work from the spiritual, not necessarily religious path, and they will be comfortable working within, between, and outside specific faith traditions. Some 3HPs will only work outside faith traditions. All will belong to the local community, and organizing in this way is what we call holistic pragmatics, in which differentiation on one level with the different faith traditions and paths can be reconciled at a level of unity at the larger level of the geographic community. meaning everyone is your neighbor. Each 3HP should know and acknowledge the scope of their experience and should teach only materials they're comfortable teaching and can teach with integrity. Each person on their individual journey should be aware of their comfort level and should explore as widely as possible, but not beyond a boundary that would threaten their sense of integrity. This is why we use the concept of geographical community to offer and hold the entire diversity of spiritual practices and paths and all the faith traditions, and again, everyone being thought of as neighbors. Recently, the word community has become a substitute for terms of meaning like-minded or the same. But the concept of biological community or of an ecosystem is much better at capturing the interactive diversity within a particular geographical space. This is our idea of community. Another way to think of the kind of local community needed today is this optimizing of individual integrity and belonging. We promote the concept of holistic pragmatics as a way to conceptualize and to begin to act in practical ways to integrate the individual journey with a diversity of spiritual practices and faith traditions. Thank you.